on the Supreme Court presently and running a candidate for re-election to the Mississippi Supreme Court, Kenny Griffis. Morning, Kenny. How are you, man?
Good morning, Gerard. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. So I know I've seen you out and about quite a bit on the campaign trail. You've been working hard across the district, been very visible. How do you think it looks right now? We're getting down to Election Day.
Yeah, we're counting down. We're inside the last 3 weeks. And so, that's really when these local elections become at the forefront. People start thinking about them and start talking about the fact, we've got some judicial candidates that we've got to decide. We've got some election commissioner races. We've got some other races other than the president and medical marijuana. So we're finally getting a little bit of focus and having people pay a little bit of attention. So it's pretty nice. I've been working at this for probably a year and a half almost.
I've seen you.
Yeah, and so trying to get out. We elect our judges in Mississippi, unlike the federal system, which we're watching kind of how that works.
Yep.
And we've got to get out of our ivory tower, and we've got to get out and meet the people and talk to the people. And so that's what I've been trying to do.
All right. So to the average Mississippian, Justice Griffis, why should they care about the so-called down ticket races such as the Supreme Court justice? As you point out, we elect those. What should a voter know and consider when casting that ballot?
Well, probably the most important thing is to know that on the Supreme Court, we are the judicial power in the state of Mississippi. We're responsible for all the courts and the court system and really what I would say the justice system in Mississippi. And so not everyone touches or goes to court or has to go to court, but a lot of people do go to court and see exactly what happens in our courts. And so it's important that we elect Supreme Court justices that are in touch with Mississippi, that are in touch with the issues here, and that decide cases based on what the law is, that are not simply trying to do what the legislature did not do or to impose their will on other people, because the hardest thing is to make sure the laws are fairly and evenly applied. And that's what we want. That's what we all want. If, in fact, we have to go to court, we want to make sure the court's going to apply the law as it is, not based on how some judge thinks it ought to be or who they want to win.
And, speaking from a business perspective, because we've been talking about business, the business environment in the country and entrepreneurship and so forth, it's pretty dang hard to stay out of court. It just seems like one way or another you get drug into it. It doesn't matter if you do anything wrong, frankly. And that's where you want it to be fair.
That's right. Not only do you want it to be fair, but you want to make sure that you're going to have some predictability.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with businesses going to court. We learned in law school that you have contracts and you can breach those contracts, and it's not always a bad thing when you breach a contract, but there's a result and a consequence that comes from it. So what we have is a court system where people can come and resolve their disputes civilly instead of 10 paces and pistols.
Yeah.
And so what you want to do as a business owner, if you're involved in commercial litigation, which I did that for over 15 years before I became a judge, is you want some predictability. You want to know what's going to happen in court, because not every case is a bet the company type case.
Yeah.
And really in 2002, when we were dealing with tort reform and jackpot justice and things like that, one of the issues was that every case should not have a punitive damage claim in there, and that we judges have to hold lawyers accountable to what they file in a case. And if they assert a punitive damage claim, there better be the facts that support that. And if not, then it needs to be out of the case quickly, because a bet the company case is different than simply a dispute over a contract.
Yeah, which it's just hard to even imagine affixing and attaching punitive damages in a contract dispute. That just seems crazy. I mean, you agree to do something, and if you didn't do it, if you didn't fulfill the obligations under the contract, there's a valid dispute there, and there's consideration as part of that. But to say that you did it, I guess, from a punitive basis, like something nefarious, that would seem like to have to rise to a very high standard for that to stick.
It does, and it should be a fair standard. And, contract law is that we enter a contract, and at some point it may not be feasible for you to compete or to complete the contract. And so there's a process we go through, and damages can be determined and quantified in that situation, because we can't even in a commercial setting force somebody to do something they don't want to do.
Right.
And if they don't want to do it, if we've got a contract with somebody to work through the end of the year, we can't force them to work through the end of the year. But we've got a way to deal with what compensation is owed and how it's owed and how it's paid and things like that. So, the court system needs to be fair. It needs to follow the law. It needs to be predictable. And because lawyers, when you go to your lawyer and ask for some advice, one of the things the lawyer's going to do is look at what the law is.
Sure.
And they're going to look at what the statutes say, what the Constitution says. They're going to look at previous court decisions, and they're going to give you advice based on the fact that they believe that court decision from 10 years ago will still be applicable today, and the courts will follow that decision in how they decide this issue.
It's your point is so valid. It's so difficult to run a business without some confidence and certainty and predictability, certainly when it comes to the rule of law. And your discussion about contracts, my contracts lawyers back in my business days used to say, Gerard, there are no contract police. So your point is you can't just force somebody. You have to go to court, and you want that to be handled and litigated fairly.
Right.
So,
and I don't know anybody that wakes up one day and says, "Boy, I want to go to court today."
No, nobody does.
But nonetheless, you find yourself there. Whether it's your family, whether something has happened and caused a divorce, whether you've had the death of a loved one and you've got to go and probate the will. Let's say you've got some property and you're trying to buy some property, and maybe you've got a dispute with your neighbor over exactly where that line is.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a rule of law, and the rule of law needs to control in all of those circumstances. So we don't fight to go to court, but we find ourselves there, and we want to get out of court, and we want to deal with the court as efficiently and effectively as we can. And we want our lawyers to be inexpensive. We don't want to hire the cheapest lawyer, but we want to make sure that lawyers can provide the best service to their clients at the lowest possible price, so that we can have access to justice by all people.
All right, so Kenny, tell us what your district includes from a geographic perspective, and then follow up by telling us about your opponent and how your contrast with her.
Okay. I'm running in the Central District, which is also the Central District for the Transportation Commissioner, Public Service Commissioner race. Mm-hmm. So we include the entire
same footprint, right?
Same footprint. Okay. The entire Metro Jackson area, which we normally think of as Hines, Madison, and Rankin. It goes east and takes in Scott County, Leake County, Newton County, Neshoba County, Lauderdale County, which is where I'm from and grew up, Kemper County, and Noxubee County. And to the west, it takes in Copiah County, Jefferson County, Claiborne, Warren, Sharkey, Issaquena, Yazoo, Humphreys, Holmes, Washington, Bolivar, and Sunflower. So there are 22 counties, approximately a million people. It's one of the closest closest districts there is, any way you look at it. And so it's a very diverse district, because there's no good way to get from Meridian to Cleveland. And the Delta and East Mississippi have some different values and different insights. And so it's a difficult district, and it's one that I've been covering, and probably got about 15,000 miles on the old truck right now, getting around meeting the people in the district.
Well, we're going to come back after this break and talk a little bit more. I want you to talk about your opponent and how you distinguish yourself and your views and your value versus her.
Great. Thank you.
We got Kenny Griffis here in the studio. He's on the Supreme Court, and he's a candidate for re-election. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. The JT Show, Hour 2, SuperTalk Mississippi. In the studio, our good friend Kenny Griffis, candidate for the Mississippi Supreme Court. Which district is it, Kenny?
Central District.
The Central District. And how many
22 counties, 1 million people.
And how many districts, how many justices do we have?
There are 3 districts. We have 3 justices from each district.
Okay, 3 from each district for a total of 9.
Right.
Okay, so all 3 that represent a district, it's the same footprint, and you've shared with us that aligns with the PSC districts as well, where we have a north, central, and south. So, all right, so tell us about your opponent, Miss or Judge Latrice Westbrooks, and how you're different.
Well, Judge Westbrooks and I served on the Court of Appeals for about 2 years together. I ended my time there as the chief judge, selected by then Chief Justice Bill Waller. Really, one of the ways I think last week or this past week at the Capitol Press Corps, we both spoke and kind of gave what our view was. And I talked about my experience, my qualifications, my judicial philosophy. I talked about some of the issues of the court system that I wanted to work on and that I thought were really important that we get some movement on, such as cameras in court, transparency, criminal justice reform, campaign finance reform, and several things like that. And my opponent's view was, well, look at my race and gender, and that this is a race and gender, that we need diversity on the court, and that's really all that's there, and that we need somebody thinking from the perspective of this. And where we differ is I really don't think that we judges come before the court with a perspective. I think judges, especially appellate judges, are there to look at what the evidence is, the facts that are properly admissible in court, look to see whether or not the trial judge made a mistake in either admitting or not admitting evidence, and then look at what the law is and what does the law say about it, and see exactly who is the fact finder and who had the right to determine whether the light was red or green or whether or not there's sufficient evidence to convict someone or not, whether they're telling the truth or not. And I think that's probably the difference, is that she wants to bring a perspective where I want to fairly and properly apply the law, as I've done for the last 18 years in our appellate courts, to make sure that we're focused on what happened in the trial court. And it doesn't matter what race you are, it doesn't matter what your gender is, your sexual preference, it doesn't matter any of that we're looking simply based on what the facts in the law are.
It's the concept of blind justice, which is foundational to the country. And frankly, Kenny, it seems like it's exactly what the Democrats tried to entrap Judge Barrett into, I guess, just stating that, I let all my personal views influence my judgment and my performance as a judge. So you touched a little bit on technology, and we're talking about it at the break. So how can we leverage technology in the judicial system to make it more effective and more transparent?
Let me back up if I can. How impressive was Amy Coney Barrett?
Off the chart.
And the important part of that, in the federal system, we nominate, and the political part of it is they go before the Senate and they get to ask these questions. Some of them silly and some of them very good. But we, in the judiciary, try to stay out of politics. Our political part of selecting judges is that we elect them. Let's talk about technology, because this is something you and I love to talk about. But,
absolutely.
Technology is ever changing. When I started practicing law, we didn't have fax machines yet. And now technology has come that everybody has a powerful machine in their purse or their briefcase and take it to court and can really practice law anywhere that they want to. Some of the things that I've been talking about and is how in this COVID crisis are we going to learn courts of the future. We're learning how to do hearings with Zoom or WebEx. We're learning that we don't have to drive 2 hours for a 15-minute hearing, which requires that we would have to charge our client for 4 hours of our time when really all it took was 15 minutes. Mississippi electronic courts that we're implementing, we're learning that we can have an online filing system with it's accessible. Any lawyer in this state from their office or from their home can look up computer files or case files and see exactly what's going on and file documents that they want to. So pretty much the next step is, where are we going to go with video? Where are we going to go with audio? Are we going to open up our courts? We've had cameras in the courtrooms, but that's really letting the media come in and recording specific trials. Are we going to put cameras in our courtrooms and allow remote access? So if you want to find out what's happening in Hinds County, Mississippi, I can go and I can click on the internet camera, just as you would if you wanted to go and see maybe a vacation spot that you love. They've got online cameras that you can go and you can watch and hear what's happening in there.
Yeah.
That's transparency. That's opening our courts. Our courts are supposed to be open. They're supposed to be accessible. And there's some things like adoptions and when details of child molestation and children testifying that we can't allow that to be open. But by and large, the general rule should be transparency. How do we get people more involved, at least accessible? How do we provide online dockets? How do we help people understand the caseload of various judges? How do we allocate judicial resources and see which judges are really handling their cases and getting their cases moving and which ones are not? And it may not be the judge's fault. It may be the type of cases that they have. Some need to be tried, some don't. But how do we use data? How do we use information so that we can make courts more accessible, we can have justice, and we can get confidence from the public? And also, how do we reduce the cost of the lawyer?
Yeah, save money.
Yeah. And what that does is that provides more access to justice because lawyers can then take cases that may be smaller and perform it at a smaller price.
Yeah.
And so, to me, that's an access to justice issue. And it's one that's really important that we focus the next years on what have we learned from COVID, where do we go, what limitations do we place on it to protect people that need to be protected, but at the same time, let's open our courts to the public, to the media, so that you can watch what we do in our courtrooms.
You know, it's a great point. And most of these technologies, they're not groundbreaking. They're not new. We're not on what we used to call the bleeding edge in the technology business. But there's a heightened awareness of them due to COVID. We were selling WebEx and web conferencing and collaboration tools going back to 2005 when Cisco bought them. I've talked about that on the air. And we had a hard time getting people to adopt them and understand their value. But now everybody's gotten accustomed to it and understands the fit and place. And the court system is no exception. We installed video arraignment systems in Hinds County. Gosh, it's probably been 15 years or so ago. But you're probably aware you got the jail, which is out by Hinds Community College. It's like 20-something miles to the courthouse in central Hinds County. And they're shuffling the incarcerated, I guess, or the subject back and forth for 5 minutes in front of a judge.
Yeah.
And so we implemented video arraignment, saving millions of dollars to the county and way more efficient and safer.
And one of the things we've learned is that through this that we can do guilty pleas. Using technology. Now, we've got to make sure that the constitutional rights of the defendant are protected.
Sure.
But we found out we can do that. We found out that there's a way to do it, and it's efficiency, and you don't put some of the law enforcement officers in harm's way having to transport and house and look over the prisoners in a courthouse, which is not always, we've got some older courthouses around, so it's not always the safest place to be. And so looking at that, and we're going to have to go back and see where does this work and does this affect the constitutional rights of the defendant? But does this
expensive?
That's right. Does this save money and can we have and I hate to say a win-win situation, but I think we can have a win-win situation.
So the point is, this is something you advocate for,
absolutely,
and you would push for,
absolutely,
which just makes total sense to me. And the level of accountability is elevated as well when you've got this sort of transparency. Shining the light always makes things more accountable.
Well, openness.
Yeah, sure.
People being able. You can walk down to the courthouse right now, and you should be able to walk in a courtroom, or you can go to the clerk's office and look at almost any document you want. You can look at the marriage records, the voting records. You can look at cases. You can look at case files. And so what's the difference? If you can look at the physical document, why can't you do that virtually on your computer?
You're saving the carbon footprint.
You sure are.
So we got to go here, but before we do, you think Judge Barrett's going to get confirmed?
I do. I think she's a quality lady, and I think I'm proud that she may serve on our Supreme Court.
She may have influenced the election for president, frankly. She made the president look pretty dang good.
She's very impressive.
She's a quality person.